Hello, I'm Dr. Pierre Samaan, and it's wonderful being back with you as we talk about these things that are helpful, things to learn, things to gain knowledge, understanding, particularly insights into our lives, lives of others, and how to improve ourselves. We approach things from a faith-based perspective because we're a Christian counseling ministry. In approaching those things from a faith-based perspective, we look at it from that spiritual perspective along with the emotional perspective and the psychological perspective. It's important to know that God created us in His image. And that means He put inside of us that knowledge of Him. Everyone has that knowledge of Him inside. And when we feel out of sorts, something's wrong. Something's out of sorts. That is, something is going in a different direction than that image is supposed to be. Sometimes it haunts us or constantly eats at us till we do something about it. Today we're talking about the Jezebel spirit. And this is a new series in which we're going to be going down the line of who was Jezebel. What did she represent? And how did she impact all of us from so long ago? It'll be a little longer series for that reason. So what I've done is I've placed in the title here the address for my blog on this article that I wrote several years ago. In that blog of about 29 pages and growing, you'll read a whole lot more information that I'm sure you'll enjoy putting the pieces together of how does the past reflect the present and how does the present reflect the past. You're going to see some connections that are going to open your eyes, I think. Certainly, each time I reread the article, add a few things or make some adjustments, I realize something new. It's almost like reading the Bible and you get new insights, these layers upon layers of new thoughts about what God is saying to us in Scripture. A lot of times we read books and we get new insights when we read the book over again and over again and over again. The Jezebel spirit is a spirit that's all around us, affecting us every day. And we're going to explain that and get through some of the details of it today and continue on as we go through these episodes on the Jezebel spirit. But I'd like you to understand, first of all, that at New Horizons Institute of Counseling, we are for healing harmony and peace. I should say healing, peace, and harmony. They go hand in hand. We want to help, and if we can help, give us a call. We do office, phone, or video counseling, and we're happy to help. Because we're a ministry, we operate on donations only. We don't charge fees. The Jezebel spirit in Scripture is known as the wicked woman of Scripture. And there's good reason for it. And if you've never read the Bible, then I would urge you to go to those passages that are talking about the Jezebel spirit in the Old Testament and in the New Testament and read up on it. And you'll find some interesting things in there. Otherwise, read the blog, read the article, and you'll learn a whole lot more, I'm sure. In Revelations 2:20, we get a sense of what the New Testament folks are saying about the Jezebel of the Old Testament. In Revelations 2:20, it says, "But I've this against you, that you tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, claiming to be inspired, and whose teaching and leading astray my servants and beguiling them into practicing sexual vice and eating food sacrificed to idols." Now, that's all I need to read because it tells it all there. God had something against those who tolerated the spirit of Jezebel. Now, some people look at the word spirit and think, ooh, it's a demon. That doesn't mean it's a demon. The word in the New Testament, spirit, can mean spirit. It can mean demon. It can mean wicked spirit. It can also mean an attitude. So oftentimes we see that attitude of Jezebel around us today. Jezebel led people into corrupted ideals. It's what she wanted. It was her entitlement of what she wanted that led people so she could get what she wanted. That's narcissism, isn't it? If you're familiar with narcissism, here's the origin of narcissism. Now, it's important to realize that all narcissists are not Jezebels. They may have an attitude of Jezebel, mild to severe, but they're not all as bad as Jezebel. So if someone identifies you as narcissistic, it doesn't mean, oh, you have a Jezebel spirit. You may have an attitude. There might be traits there. Work on those things so it doesn't get any worse. And often I use the continuum example. You have Jezebel spirit, our attitude, Jezebel spirit here in this continuum of mild to severe. Mild is going to be the narcissist, who's typical narcissist, who's got a conscience and feels bad many times when they do something wrong, but be their selfishness or their entitlement overcomes that. Then they might do more to make up for it. So they're not so bad. They might have some traits there, but certainly not all of them. They might be considered covert narcissists, more under the table type narcissists over here on this end. Now, as the spectrum goes through, as you follow the spectrum, it gets worse. The attitude becomes stronger and stronger, and at some point, it's going to turn into, in faith-based counseling, a spirit. That spirit is much stronger. And at this far end, you have what we call the malignant narcissist, that true, genuine Jezebel, who is pure evil. And we're going to be later on speaking about these various areas, especially this one over here, but realize that you don't run into these individuals very much. They're in powerful positions oftentimes. They may be in prison oftentimes, but you're not going to run into them every day. These you're going to run into every day. But over here, these are the bad ones. These are the ones you really want to stay away from. These are the dictators of the world, the ruthless dictators, the ruthless politicians, the ruthless leaders in other realms. Here they have no conscience. It's gone. And so over here now, we get to a point of sociopathic behavior that a narcissist is sociopathic when they come to this point of no guilt, no remorse, doing things and I can get away with this stuff and you can't because you feel guilty. I'm all powerful. That's what they're thinking over here. And as they get over here to this antisocial behavior of the malignant narcissist, it gets bad. And we're seeing a lot of that today on TV and all the things that are going on. So keep that in mind, because we will be going through this spectrum as we continue to talk about the Jezebel spirit. So she led a lot of people, the people of God, to be corrupted, and corrupted ideals can only be established and maintained through methods of power and control. Certainly you can influence someone, but if someone has a conscience, if someone knows the difference between right and wrong, Here again, we go back to scripture that tells us God's identity is in us. Therefore, we're born with a sense of right and wrong. We develop that sense in our interactions in our developmental years with our parents, and that sense becomes enhanced or stronger, or it weakens, becomes less noticeable, still there, still knowing right and wrong, still feeling bad if you know you did something wrong, but it's not as strong as it would be had you come out of a home that you receive the proper nurture important for you. Power and control. So what do? They exert that power and control one way or another, and we see that in our governments or in communities. So we see it in certain individuals, we see it in bosses, supervisors, perhaps even in your church leader or some other authority figure, because they need to be there. They're not satisfied being down here. The Jezebel spirit moves up that ladder to a place where they have position to exert power and control, to get their way, because they're entitled to it as far as they're concerned. Converting all of Judaism, all of the Israelis, the Hebrews back then, into a religion of Baal worship. Jezebel was a Baal worshiper. Now, Baal was an idol, an image, a false god. Baal represented the devil. And the devil was worshipped. Satan, Lucifer, was worshipped by Jezebel. And you'll read a lot of stories about what she did and how she did it. But she tried to get everyone to worship who she worshiped in order to fall in line with what she wanted you to do. Methodically eliminated God's representatives in Israel. She, one by one, killed off the priests of God, the followers, the leaders. Each time the group got smaller. The prophet Elijah became more concerned, and we could say fearful. He saw his buddies, his allies, his friends slowly being taken away. And I can imagine what he was thinking. God, where are you? God, what's happening? What are you going to do about this? Aren't we saying that today? You know, with all this that's going on, the honest folks, let's say, God, what's happening? How can they do these things and get away with it? Why isn't someone stopping them? Why is this happening? We're saying that. We're wondering. With faith, we know what the scripture tells us. So prophecy tells us these things are going to happen. Expect them. Bolster yourself. Get ready for the various things coming as he prepares his return for that time of the tribulation, as scripture talks about. So we know, okay, it's all going to work out. God's in control. God's going to help us through whatever's going on. And it's all for the purpose of salvation, of eternity, and so on. You don't have to believe that. But look around you as you see these things unraveling, as you see chaos occurring. You know, go back to the 1960s, 1968, 69, the weathermen. Back then, you know, I'd forgotten all about the weathermen. I was reading an article the other day reminding me about it. I mean, they were very similar to what's going on now with Antifa. The weathermen were a far left group, a Democrat group, far left, and believe me, there are good Democrats, so I'm not speaking bad of all Democrats, although I don't see how you can stay one if with all the beliefs that they're having, but there are good Democrats out there. I forgive you. Help us to understand why you're still allowing yourself to do these things, because it's hurting all of us. It's destroying the country. Now, I'm getting political there. Couldn't help it, I'm sorry. Just kind of squirted out. Jezebel was very political. Jezebel was like the weatherman back then in the 60s, in the mid-60s, late 60s. They did terrible things. I'd encourage you to go to Wikipedia or some other encyclopedia, read up on those things that they did, because very similar to what we're seeing today. Now, we got through that, didn't we? We came out the other end and things improved, although they had a strong influence of bringing more and more people to that far left, or that Jezebel area of entitlement and lack of empathy, inability to understand the needs of others because their needs were more important. Jezebel threatened to kill the prophet Elijah, and believed that kings and queens had absolute power to whatever they wanted. Now, oops, I got to get a little political again here, I'm sorry. Kings and queens, those are leaders. Kings and queens, we see that in Europe. We don't have the words king and queen here among leaders in our country or other Western countries, but they represent those leaders that accept the Jezebel spirit, the entitlements, the lack of empathy, the fantasy of their way of bringing utopia to earth, heaven to earth. Their fantasy of thinking it's all going to be perfect, it's all going to be good because it's their way of thinking. That's Jezebel. That was the Jezebel of the past. That's the attitude or spirit of Jezebel in the present. We can see what it did in the past and what happened to her in the past. Wonder what's going to happen in the present. And at some point, what's going to happen to those that follow that attitude or spirit of Jezebel? Well, there's some empowering truths that we can look at and realize, gosh, it's not doom and gloom. As a Christian, in Christian counseling, I look at it as in Jesus Christ Messiah, I follow the master teacher who is in the one and only Son of God. I follow the true teacher who speaks truth because that truth comes directly from God. There are so many false teachers today that we have to be careful of. What are they saying? Well, back it up. If they're backing it up, okay, now give me some evidence of what you're saying, and let's look at some history here, and let's look at the whole, not just a little bit, and let's look at the behavior. Never go by what someone says, go by what they do. And for us men, you don't go by what we say. We speak from our heart, and our heart is our behavior. Female is more speaks from her heart. And in a similar way, when politicians say something that sounds good, look at their record. Are they doing it? Are they following through with what they're saying? No different with your church pastor or your church leader or your boss, your supervisor, or even your friend. People say things But you don't necessarily go by what they say, you go by what they do. Are they following it up? And that attitude of Jezebel is someone who frequently, I'm not saying once in a while, but often, more often than not, says one thing, does another. And what they do is harmful to me, to you, to all of us. My service is to the innocent and naive. Those who haven't done harm, those who are good people. And if you're good, and if you were raised good, you're not necessarily street smart. And it's easy to be taken advantage of unless you learn those things to help you to set the boundaries, set those guardrails in protecting yourself, but also in staying the direction that you were raised in or the direction that you chose to go in for doing good and being good. I strive to walk humbly with God, thinking of others before myself. That's what the Bible teaches us. Serving God is serving others, letting God work through us. Now, none of us do that perfectly. Sometimes we get a little selfish once in a while, but more often than not, we're thinking of the other's needs. And in relationship, isn't that what we want? A partner who is thinking of our needs? And if they're thinking of our needs, doesn't that make it easier to do the same, to give back? You reap what you sow, giving back, thinking of their needs. Now you have a genuine relationship, a healthy and good relationship that has a very high chance of lasting. That's what we want in relationships, especially marriages. In 2 Peter chapter 2, I mentioned it a little earlier, just briefly here, but the scripture itself is interesting, and I wanted to close with reading the scripture in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, and this is out of the Message Bible. The Message Bible is a paraphrase of the Bible, putting it in current language, saying what it's saying, but putting in the language that we speak today. You might say the street language that we speak today. And it says, "But there were also lying prophets among the people then, just as there will be lying religious teachers among you. They'll smuggle in destructive divisions, pitting you against each other, biting the hand of the one who gave them a chance to have their lives back. They've put themselves on a fast downhill slide to destruction." I have to pause there a minute. I look at all this stuff going on now, and I hardly watch the news anymore. It makes you boil a little bit. Then I got to take a deep breath and say, all right, forgive me, Lord, I'm getting upset. I know it's in your hands. Help us with this. Help our leaders with this. Help to lift the veil of darkness of whatever might be there that's preventing people from seeing the fast downhill slide that they're going into destruction. Look at the past. Look at countries that have went that way. Downhill slide to destruction. And here the Bible tells us that. The Bible is amazing on how we learn and grow from the lessons we're learning coming from Scripture thousands of years ago. There is a God, and He's for us. He's on our side. And the Scripture goes on to say, a fast downhill slide to destruction, but not before they recruit a crowd of mixed up followers who can't tell right from wrong. Well, now, I'm going to pause there again. We just got done talking about crowds, about mob psychology. And isn't that what this scripture is speaking of? That the Jezebel spirit, the Jezebel attitude influences the crowd, recruits people into the crowd, into the mob, people who are, some know what's right and what's wrong, and they're protesting, demonstrating, and that's good. That's freedom. That's what we want in this country, free speech. Then some who are really mixed up and they're going the other way with it, turning into mob violence, rioting, and so on. That's a Jezebel spirit. That's a Jezebel attitude. They give the way of truth a bad name. They're only out for themselves, the scripture's telling us. They'll say anything that sounds good to exploit you. Ouch. They won't, of course, get by with it, the scripture says. They'll come to a bad end. For God has never just stood by and let that kind of thing go on. Look at the malignant narcissists, the severe Jezebels of the past. What happened to them? Read your history books. Go back to school. Start learning a little more. Death and destruction. In many cases, horrible death and destruction. In many cases where countries were influenced, deceived by the malignant narcissist, by the Jezebel spirit in their leadership. What happened to those countries? Decimated. Look at countries today that are similar leaders. Some look like they're prospering for a time, for a season, but it's going to come to a bad end, a downhill crash. Scripture tells us that thousands of years ago. It's happened over and over again. Always we'd like it to happen right away, but it happens in God's timing. But it happens. And we can expect that to happen again for those that are drifting in this direction. Don't let yourself drift in this direction. Open up your eyes. Start reading your scripture. If you belong to another faith, start reading the words coming from your faith, because almost all the religions are based on faith, hope, love, being good, doing good. There's one or two out there that are based on killing, murdering, deceiving, Jezebel-like behaviors. We don't want to follow those. We want to be hopeful, and we want to have faith and trust and not be afraid. Okay, enough said about that. Sorry if I got a little political there on those things. We're going to continue in this next time. Press the like button if you got something out of this. Subscribe. And down below, I have a link. I put the link in the title also for my blog on this article if you'd like to read it in more detail. God bless. See you again. Bye.